Welcome to the City Center podcast. I'm Jerry Marcello. Take a photo and you created a happy memory. And when that photo is turned to maybe 50, 75, or 100 years old, that memory becomes something else altogether. Today, we'll look at 3 photos that will unlock a part of West Palm Beach's history, a window into when our town was just a tropical frontier, surprisingly different than what we see today. Join us for a trip through time, next on the City Center podcast. Joining us today is Rose Guerrero, currently Director of Research and Archives for the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. Rose, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We have a city which is fairly young. I mean, we've been around for what, about 130, 140 years?
Around there, yeah. 131 next, actually in November.
In November.
November is the birthday, November 3rd or 4th.
Yeah. So in spite of the fact that we've had a short period of time on this planet, there's a lot of stuff has happened here.
Right.
And it is wonderful that we also have a facility like where you work. I want you to tell everybody about it because I think a lot of people don't realize you're there.
Right.
And it's an amazing place.
Well, the Historical Society of Palm Beach County actually started in the 1930s, 1937, and we've been collecting materials and information about the county for over 88 years now. And our purpose is to provide access to our community so that they can learn more about where they live. And so we actually are housed in the 1916 courthouse in downtown West Palm Beach. We have a museum there. It's very active. We're an active society, lots of events always going on. We have exhibits that are going around year round for people to enjoy. So you should check us out on our website, pbchistory.org. You can find out all about all the great things that we do for our community.
Now, I've been there and I've had the opportunity to see. It's really neat. There are collections that have been donated to you guys from people's homes, to their attics, their photo archives, and it's fascinating how that captures the history.
Absolutely.
Of what's going on there. It's a fantastic place to be. Really, really cool. Highly recommended that people go by and visit.
Absolutely. If you're ever interested in learning where you're from, where you are at in Palm Beach County, reach out to us. We'll be able to at least show you some items that we have associated to the area so that you can learn more about us.
We have so many transplants here that come here because of the weather. It's nice and all that good stuff.
Yes.
They are floored by when they learn about the things that have happened here and how we got to be the city that we've become and the county that we are.
Right. And so even though we think of West Palm Beach being 131 years old, we need to realize that people have been living here for over 13,000 years in Florida. So Florida is old in general. And so that's a really vast part of our collection comes from that part, our pioneer eras, people that, traversed the wild wilderness of the coastline to make their way down here and to, settle in an unknown area. A lot of our images showcase this barren land that ends up being Palm Beach. What we think of or we see today as Palm Beach really was a swampland.
Wow. So, yeah, you're right. At the very beginning, we were clearly an area that was truly frontier land.
Yes.
It's amazing to see how in a very short period of time between the 1890s and say the 1920s, which is not a whole lot of time, the landscape changed so quickly.
Lots of things are happening within that, very small amount of time. When you think about it being like less than 30 years of a period of time, so much happens. So many people are coming through and developing this area and making it their home and turning it into the great place that we know it as today.
And that information is all available at the Historical Society.
Absolutely.
Come and find it. Right?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Well, let's go ahead and start taking a look. We talked about photographs being something where we capture a lot of the history, and they can be markers for discussion. So we're going to start taking a look at some photographs. We have in front of us, for our audience that is listening in rather than watching, we'll do our best to describe them. The very first photograph we have, we're seeing what seems to be a old style 2-story building. It has a little balcony and it has on front of it a very important sign. The sign says, "The Curry Investment Company Real Estate," in huge letters.
Right.
Real estate is obviously a very big part of the very early days of West Palm Beach. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so The Curry investment is actually George Curry. He came to West Palm Beach in the early 1900s. He was actually Canadian. So he comes down south
Mm,
and he makes West Palm Beach his home. And he sees the wonderful opportunities here in the area, including the fact that there's so much land that people are seeking. Him being one of those people. And he starts seeing the opportunity to be able to sell that.
mm.
And like most pioneers of that era, he had multiple, forms of businesses, and the Curry Investments was one of those. And so this is actually this is around 1905, 1906
Oh,
when this property is being developed. And he actually has the office on the first floor.
I see. Now, looking at this photograph, and just to let you know, we sort of did the math here and sort of did a location here. Is at the corner of Clematis and South Olive, and we have a picture of what it looks like now. And we're going to be showing that here, and it's very familiar to those who wander Clematis and wander the street. It's sort of fun to see how what was clearly a frontier street, a frontier town.
Right.
You could hear the clip clop of horses and things running
Yes.
down the street, and it becomes a place where this was sort of the jumping off point where a lot of the neighborhoods that
Yes.
we consider to be old neighborhoods in West Palm, the El Cid and Grandview and
Right.
all those neighborhoods, they began by being sold by places like this.
Absolutely. So Curry Investments was a big real estate company in the early 1900s. Curry, who eventually becomes a mayor for West Palm Beach, was highly invested. So he designs some of the first subdivisions in West Palm Beach, including Pleasant City,
Mm.
so which was a designated Black community, and he wanted to name it the most beautiful town in West Palm Beach. He gives it all these pretty street names, so Beautiful Street and so forth. Is kind of the theme that he was going for because he was selling it as this pleasant area for people to live in.
How about that? And of course, Curry Park, which
Yes.
is a beautiful, beautiful a waterfront park on the Intracoastal, named after Curry. I would assume that he probably had something to do with the land
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah. So it was deeded to the city by his family when he passed.
So what we're seeing here in the early 1900s, a small town that was growing exponentially based on the real estate, the land that we
There
have.
was a huge boom going on in the early 1900s. We sometimes think of it as the 1920s boom, but really it started in the teens.
Ah,
In the 19 teens, this huge boom. People are starting to hear tales of this West Palm Beach that is really developing. It's got lots of farmland. It's got so much opportunity that developers are really selling it to outside stakeholders.
so it's hot, hot, hot,
Hmm.
which sort of leads us to our next photograph. Our next photograph shows a building with many, many people. Again, I'm doing this for our audience who may not be able to watch the video, but we're seeing an elevated street, an intersection of a building in front with many, many people pouring into it, looking like they're trying to get into the building. Rose, what is this building?
So that is actually the Farmers Bank and Trust, which
Oh,
was built in 1926. So it was actually in the same spot that we were just looking at in that image
the
of the
same spot,
Curry Investments.
right?
And this bank, Farmers Bank and Trust, which had built their new location in West Palm Beach in 1926, this image that we're looking at is actually a run on the bank in 1927.
Let's
So,
explain what a run on the bank is.
so when the community loses trust with the bank, they're afraid that their money is not going to become available to them. And so they rush a
To
whole
get
group
everything out.
of people all at once, rush to a bank to get all their money out of a bank. And we understand that banks don't really work that way. They don't always hold all of everyone's single dollar that they invested into the bank that same day. So there's so many newspaper articles about this exact date when this happens because when Farmers Bank and Trust was experiencing this, three banks prior a month ago had already gone out of business. And that
Mm,
was why there was this run on Farmers Bank and Trust, was that there was an overwhelming fear of banks not having their money available for them because banks were going out of business.
Wow. Anybody who has watched the holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life by Frank Capra, will
Yes.
know exactly what this is about. It is exactly the moment when they had to shut the doors and they had like $2 left after the entire
Yes.
night. So that was a happy story, but this was real and it was very tragic. People were truly frightened that
They
they were
were, but
losing
what's
everything.
so interesting about this story is that the newspapers discussing this experience talk about how the wealthy members of society would not let their community fail in
Mm.
this moment. And so when there was this run on the banks, the community gathered and the wealthy people that lived in Palm Beach and West Palm Beach brought up the amount of money needed in order to pay out the deposits for the people that were coming out of to gather their deposits from the bank.
So
So there was a list of all the residents, the wealthy residents in the area that were offering their own finances to support the bank.
wow. So that is fascinating. So to keep the bank solvent, those who had money, which I guess in Palm Beach and West Palm Beach, there was a substantial amount.
1/4 of the wealth in the United States had residency in Palm Beach in 1927.
That's amazing. And so these people stood up, took care of the community, and kept the bank solvent. I don't imagine that's something that we would see too much happening these days, but in those days, I guess there was a true sense of community.
There
There was.
really was. There
That's
really
really
was.
fascinating. I had never heard that story. That is fascinating. That there was a gathering and help during this financial crisis. But that was not the only difficult moment or difficult problem that the West Palm Beach and Palm Beach County had in that period of time. Just the year prior, there was, of course, the hurricane of 1928.
Well, this is 27. This image that
Oh, that's
we're looking at
27.
is
Okay.
27. So,
Ah,
but you are right. There were multiple crises that were occurring within that period of time. So, even prior to 27 and the run on that bank, multiple banks were going out of business. The boom we were seeing in the other images of Curry's investment, the bust was being felt by 24, 25, 26. Investment in South Florida was kind of waning.
sure.
There were issues with people receiving the materials that they needed to build in South Florida. There was a hurricane in Miami that made people feel very uncomfortable with investing in an area that might experience disaster. And then again, there were several banks that were experiencing uncertainty. So by 27, with the bank we see here experiencing a crisis, there was already this feeling of uncertainty in the financial aspect of South Florida.
Wow. So the warm glow of the early 1900s took a real hit with these unexpected difficulties, and
Yes.
it made a great change in our community for decades to come. Let's talk little bit about the photograph that sort of matches it. Jumping to modern day, there is the look, and that, believe it or not, is exactly the same building. If you look very closely, the arch at the front of the building there matches the sort of cool entryways that the old photograph has. It's interesting to see how these buildings survived.
Hmm.
That the architecture, we're used to thinking of South Florida basically bulldozing everything down and starting over again. It's wild to walk along streets in downtown and you can find buildings that retain some of the architectural qualities of their original design. The
Yes.
fire station,
Right. Yes.
those are almost identical to what they look like then and to how now. And it's wonderful to see that there is a taste of 100-year-old architecture that still can be seen in downtown West Palm Beach and on Clematis.
Yeah, it's beautiful when a community embraces the different aspects of their architect that really showcase the culture here.
Well, and we could talk about the courthouse. The
Yes.
courthouse is an incredible example of original architecture being resurrected. I don't, it's probably beyond the scope of our discussion today, but that building was at one point in the 60s and 70s encased.
It was, yes. So the art building that we're in today, the 1916 courthouse,
Yeah.
was the original that was built, that's why we get our name, 1960. But then they built an additional building that mirrored that same structure behind it. And then as our community keeps growing and growing, we keep adding to that building. Is we see it quite often, it's at that point it was more financially sustainable to just keep adding to a building versus to, you know, demolish
Start over.
and start over. And so by 1972, like you mentioned, there was a full expansion and they did a really wonderful job. I always say, when you think about how 1972, they actually were very thoughtful of how they constructed that addition because they actually protected the facade of that building by, kind of creating a buffer.
Mhm.
And then you see this very, industrial looking
It was. It's a
construction
good way of putting it. Yeah.
that goes all the way out to what is today the street of Dixie and Third Street.
Yeah, and you can find instances of these photographs on the web where you see this exactly that very industrial looking block kind of
Hmm.
structure all the way out to the sidewalk, and then one day they start knocking parts of it down, and in the middle is this sort of being reborn,
Right.
the original 1916 structure, and it's inspiring to see that something that was essentially buried underneath it's the success of the town and the need for it to expand is then revealed.
Hmm.
It's very fascinating to see that.
It is.
So we've talked a little bit about a period of time that included some pretty major things that happened here. We had the closure of banks and the slowdown in the economy, which obviously took a big hit. And then there was the earlier storm that hit Miami
Hmm.
earlier in the 1920s, but then there was the storm of 28, and I mentioned it earlier. It is a storm which would everyone still talks about. It is
Right.
the scope of the tragedy is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the image that you have here kind of depicts very well
Yeah.
how the community experienced this storm. So the image you have showing the Como building in the background and this, shot looking east on Clematis Street
Mm.
with people picking up debris, really highlights that storm. So the 1920 hurricane hits in September of 28. I mean, at that time, they didn't really give names to hurricanes. And they really, what signified them or what was significant about them was the damage and devastation that
Yeah.
occurred because of them. And this 28 hurricane is considered one of the top deadly hurricanes in the United States. It was a disastrous storm, over 4,000 people
And there wasn't 4,000 people in the eastern communities. Most of that was out west.
out west in Pahokee and Belle Glade. They lost their lives. Lots of migrants, immigrants that had come in that were working in the fields in Belle Glade and Pahokee and the other, areas next to Lake Okeechobee. So we have such great, warning systems today. And I think that was, it's been developed because of these types of storms.
Yeah.
But no one was expecting the dike to fail, and the dike failed, and a huge flood occurred in that area, and it wiped the community clean.
It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, and many of those victims of that tragedy are buried here in West Palm
Yeah.
Beach, over on 25th Street, I believe. And
Yes. Yeah.
so that is it was a horrible moment for the county, as it were, and another sea change for the city, because as you can see in the photograph, there's a lot of open sky now. A lot of the
Right.
older buildings, probably buildings dating back to those first 1900 buildings that were built of wood, and they didn't survive.
No.
But as you can see here in the photograph, the Como building, which was what, about 1925, it was of a more modern construct, survived. And I think we saw essentially a rebirth of the skyline of West Palm Beach, with old buildings being taken out and obviously being replaced by more modern, more stable type buildings.
Right.
So from a destruction, a rebirth took place. But at the same time, these tragedies, the damage created by the hurricanes of the 1920s and the depression, since the area into a quiet period, wouldn't you say, for a couple
Oh,
decades?
absolutely. So this is 28, right? And we've already seen, the many crises that were occurring in South Florida with the banks failing, with other storms, with the boom no longer existing and went bust. And then you get kind of a pin put in to South Florida development because of that 28 storm. It's kind of released a desire for people to really come down and build. But then by 29, there's a greater view of, oh, the United States goes into a greater depression. So finances are really tight. People are not building, they are not developing the same way that they used to, but they actually are developing in a different way. So we think about like what we see as Palm Beach State College today actually gets developed in the 1930s. So buildings are being built, but they're actually being refitted from old buildings.
See.
So Palm Beach State College gets developed into older buildings where one of those buildings that the college was actually developed in is a building that is now part of the Dreyfus campus.
Oh,
So it
okay.
was a Meisner building that was actually refitted into a state college.
So it was a period of time where there was an evolution taking
Mhm.
place, but the evolution was a little bit more was slower.
Right. And
And
I should actually correct myself because that was actually a community college at that point.
ah,
It wasn't a state college until
okay.
much later.
There you go. Okay, so once again, we see a community who is sort of limping through a depression, limping through a very difficult period of time
Right.
as far as imaging is concerned, but it's the same time still growing. It took until probably like the mid 40s after the war that things really started to perk up. Would that be correct? Or
I would agree with you. War is a time when, development and building is really slowing down because you are really focusing your energy into your stakeholders of making sure that their community is not fully affected by what's occurring overseas. World War II was very much on the forefront in Palm Beach County. We have war actually on our door because of the coastline being accessible to German U-boats, and our Allied ships actually get bombed in the early 1940s from these German U-boats. They are sending out torpedoes,
Hmm.
and laying waste to a lot of our allied ships. It actually was one of the most dangerous periods of time in the United States, especially on the East Coast because of that.
Wow, I didn't realize that we had the enemy that close to the
Oh, you
coastline.
could be watching from your window as a ship is burning in front of you. So that
Man.
was very much here. And so while we're not developing again in the same manner that we were seeing in the early 1900s, we are still developing in many different instances.
And during that period of time, there was a constant flow of young men and women who were going to be going into the service
Yes.
coming through the area.
Yeah. So even when we talk about the 1930s, also there was the development of the first airport in West Palm Beach. So at that point, it was called Morrison Field. It was named after Grace Morrison, a female developer that invested in airplanes. In into the airport. It was one of her dreams. She was really pushing for it, and
Mm.
she unfortunately passed away before the airport opened. And so they kind of changed the trajectory of what they were going to name it, and they named it after her
Oh,
passing. And then so Morrison Field opens up as a public airport, but then gets uh, rented out by the US government to become a military
sure.
base.
Yeah.
So it became an army base, and it in fact was like a very important army base during World War II. So yes, lots of soldiers coming through. It was one of the last, places on US soil that they would, experience before they headed off to the multiple war fronts.
So they got here, they said, wow, this West Palm Beach is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then after the war, we found a lot of them coming back.
Absolutely. So then you see a boom again.
Ah, okay. So we are now moving into yet another phase of the growth of West Palm Beach, which probably should be reserved for another segment of our
Absolutely.
show. But what we've discovered here is that simply a few photographs can unlock untold stories,
Absolutely.
and you guys have a lot of photographs.
We have over 4 million photographs in our collection, and we would love to share them with you.
That is fantastic. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for what you do there what you did here for us talking with us today, but
Absolutely.
also what what all of you do over at the Historical Society. It is fantastic what you provide us with, and it is a treasure of our past. And so I want to thank you for everything you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
And thank you for joining us. The City Center podcast is launching its second full year of video podcasts, and we've got a lot in store for 2026. So feel free to follow or subscribe to get the latest from the City of West Palm Beach. This has been a production of the City of West Palm Beach Communications Department. I'm Jerry Marcello. We'll see you next time.